لا إله إلا الله.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في كتابه العزيز: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. وقال سيدنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: اتق الله حيثما كنت، أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. صدق الله العظيم وصدق رسوله الكريم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. Our Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, he was born as an orphan. And as a young man, he worked as a shepherd, grazing the animals for the people of the Quraysh outside of Mecca. When he became older and he realized the ignorance of his people, he withdrew from them into the cave of Hira. And after he came out of that cave with revelation, he would very often spend the night in prayer. In other words, there was a lot of time in his life of solitude. But one thing that's different about his solitude and ours is that it was so much more positive. Nowadays, you have children, they have their parents, and parents have their children, but they don't spend time together. You have young people, they're not out in the wilderness grazing animals, they're at school and they're in our masajid, but they don't feel seen or heard. It's almost like they're invisible. You have older folks, we realize the problems in our society, but we're withdrawing into our phones and our screens, and it just makes us feel hopeless and powerless and more isolated than ever before. And older folks, with no one to visit them, they don't bring the night to life with their prayers. Instead, they're falling asleep in the soft blue glow of their television screens. In so many ways, our life and our society is diametrically opposed to the Medina that Rasulullah ﷺ built. But that makes sense, because the society that Rasulullah ﷺ built was inspired by revelation. And the process of isolation and atomization and powerlessness that we feel today is a strategy of the Taghut. It's done on purpose to make people feel that they can't make a change, to break down communities and to scatter individuals so they can be crushed more easily individually. But we still have the example of the Prophet ﷺ in front of us. And the loneliness, the widespread feeling of dread, and the widespread feeling of not being able to do anything can push us towards his example, so that we can heal and improve our condition and the condition of the people around us if we do three things. Number one is to reclaim the jama'ah. Number two is to fortify our hearts with the dhikr of Allah Ta'ala. And number three is to work together to bring as much good as possible into this dark world. But the first thing we have to do is reclaim the jama'ah, bring it back. Because you and I weren't meant to be alone. Alhamdulillah, alladhi khalaqakum min nafsin wahida, وَخَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا وَبَثَّ مِنْهُمَا رِجَالًا كَثِيرًا وَنِسَاءً. Allah Ta'ala, He made you from one soul and created from that soul its mate, and from the two of them created multitudes of men and women, because you weren't made to be alone, you were made to live in community. It's fitrah, it's natural. In 2023, the US Surgeon General released a report that said that loneliness that people feel, it's like hunger or thirst. It's a sign that you need to do something. People who suffer chronic loneliness, it's worse than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's a sign that you have to make a change. It's a sign that you're going against your fitrah. And the widespread loneliness that we feel, it's amazing, because today we're more connected than ever before, but more people report than ever before not having someone to talk to. But that's not because you're some kind of bad luck accident. If you take a step back and you realize this is not just something happening to us, it's happening across our society. People don't go to houses of worship anymore. People don't go to community events anymore. People don't see their neighbors anymore. And this is done on purpose, to make people weak and isolated so they don't come together to change things. I'll give you an example. All throughout history, when one nation or empire tried to invade someone else's territory, the hardest places to conquer were the cities. From ancient times until now, Some people can say that's because of the nature of urban warfare. Okay. We might say it's because of street-to-street fighting. Okay. These are all factors. But historians say it's because people who lived in cities, they had a sense of solidarity. They had a sense of unity. In other words, if you had a farmer and someone's farm, 5 or 10 farms down, got messed up, you wouldn't feel anything because you don't know that person. But someone from your neighborhood got hurt, that's the kid from our neighborhood. He was like all of our children. People don't feel that nowadays. Give you an example. We live in Los Angeles. What's the connection of people to their city in this day and age? Maybe it's a baseball cap. Maybe it's a cheap t-shirt. Maybe it's an overpriced jersey that you purchase from some corporation, some company, some franchise that doesn't care about the community and wouldn't think twice about leaving their community for another community that gives them bigger tax breaks. That's the only thing bringing people together. To the extent that you can have grandparents abducted from their homes here in Southern California. You can have parents taken from their children. You can have brothers and sisters separated. And it doesn't even come up on our radar. We don't think about it. We don't talk about it because we're so isolated. And if they can do it to them, what makes you think they can't do it to you? And if you pay attention to the news from Palestine, this idea of rounding up all these people and then finding some other authoritarian country that you can pay off their ruler and then sending all these people there, that's exactly what they want to do to the people of Gaza. Take police violence. Look at the names of unarmed young people of color who are killed by the police. How many Muslim names do you see? And how much do we talk about this in our community? That silence is a big statement. And some people, it's not just that. I know some people, they give khutbah and they say, if you talk about this, people they come after say, don't talk about these things. Just talk about prayers. Just talk about prayers. Okay. In the Sunan of Abi Dawood, Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, pray in jama'ah. Because the sheep that strays from the flock is the one that gets eaten by the wolf. And now we're busy isolating ourselves, scattering ourselves, dividing ourselves, so that we're all grazing individually on our phones, that we're being surrounded by the wolves and we don't do anything about it. No, you have to reclaim the jama'ah. What did the Prophet ﷺ do when he came to Medina to Munawwara? He didn't build a palace, he built the masjid. And that's not just architecture, that's metaphysics, because it's the foundation of the relationship of the people in the community. You see two people, are they co-workers or are they brothers? It depends on what they do together. Rasulullah, he established that. Rasulullah established the brotherhood and the fellowship between the Muhajirun and the Ansar. Rasulullah ﷺ, he included the non-Muslims in the constitution of Medina because they were one community that was supposed to stand up for each other. But we've lost that. The Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, he said spread salam. He didn't say give speeches. He didn't even say spread ilm. He said give salam. You welcome people into the community because it's supposed to be one community. We have to reclaim that jama'ah. But that's easier said than done. That's hard work. So what did the Prophets alayhi wasalam teach to fortify our souls and our hearts so we can do that work? Before you were made to be with other people, we said that's part of your fitrah. Before you were made to be with other people, you were made to be alone with Allah Ta'ala. Sayyidina Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam, Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu anha, she mentions about him that at the time of the night, when the lover goes to their beloved, Sayyidina Rasulullah would get up and he would go to his beloved. He would pray to Allah Ta'ala. You look in the Quran and you find stories about the people that Allah Ta'ala loved them. What did He give them? He gave them times of solitude in their life. Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam was put into the well. Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, when he fled from Egypt in his youth, he was alone in the desert. Sayyidina Maryam alayhi salam, she was alone in her mihrab. And then later on, when it was time to give birth, she withdrew from all the people. In each of these cases, they spent time alone and it gave them fortitude to come back and bring khair into the world. And that's what they did. Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, he brought light into the prisons of Egypt. Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, when he came to the end of his journey, and what did the first thing he did? He's in incredible need. But the first thing he does is he looks around, he sees people who need help watering their flock, he helps them. Sayyidina Maryam, they slandered her, she came out of that, and she gave them a prophet. This is the way that the Prophets ﷺ work. Look at our Prophet ﷺ. He was completely isolated, abused at Ta'if. But what comes out of that? Because his heart is connected to Allah Ta'ala, one of the most beautiful du'as that you get. And an example of rahmah and mercy that lasts for the ages. This is what happens when a person connects their heart to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. They can withstand trials and tribulations. All four of the Imams, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad, they all went to jail. Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, he was slated for execution. and he got a last-minute reprieve from the ruler. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah, he was put under intense pressure to utter falsehood against the Quran, but he stood steadfast, and the ulama, they say that we owe him until this very day. May Allah have mercy on him. This is what happens when people have a community that they belong to, and they have a heart that's connected with their Lord. In the time of Algerian colonization, the leader of the resistance was Amir Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi rahimahullah. And the French, when they finally captured him, you could imagine their arrogance. They brought him back to France, and they put him in prison. After some time, they had to build a Muslim cemetery in that prison because all of the guards that came to watch his cell, they became Muslim. When someone's heart is connected, isolation doesn't affect them. They're always with Allah. In the early 1900s, Hazrat Hussein Ahmad Madani rahimahullah and his teacher, Shaykh al-Hind Mahmud al-Hassan rahimahullah, this was at the time when the non-cooperation movement was gaining steam. And they were arrested by the British due to their teaching activities. So when they brought them into the court, they didn't recognize the authority of the British judges. So when they were brought in the court, everybody has to stand. They refused to stand. This wasn't some single moment of courage. This was a planned protest. This was a planned statement. They're not going to stand for an authority that they don't recognize. So then they put them in prison. They sent them to Malta, horrible conditions. And in those conditions, what do people do in their solitude? I want you to think about what we do in our solitude. We're just hopeless, scrolling through our phones, feeling bad for ourselves, feeling that we can't do anything. They put them in a horrible prison. Mawlana Madani, rahimahullah, he used to teach hadith in Madinatul Munawwara, but it was hard for him to memorize Quran. When he came to Malta, he completed his hifz. They conducted teaching circles and halaqat, and they gathered people up. And then the British guards, this is what happened. Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, when he went to jail, the people, they recognized his goodness. They said, interpret our dreams for us. These people are in jail. The British guards, when they would pass by their cells during the rounds, they couldn't help themselves. They would take off their caps, hold them over their chest, and they would show them great deference. Because that's what happens when you see a person, they're connected with their Lord. So, we build this community, we reclaim that jama'ah, we include everybody, and we work on ourselves. And then what happens? We come together to bring as much good as is humanly possible into this world. Some people, they hear the things we're talking about. They say, brother, you're standing up on a Friday prayer, and you're saying all these things about all these issues that we can't change. The hadith says, speak truth to the powerful, and you're speaking truth to the powerless. We can't do anything. We could respond to that by saying, this is our ethical duty, and no matter what, we have to stand up for what's right, and that's true. We could respond to this by saying that taking up the sunnah of Rasulullah ﷺ and doing these actions, it's good for our own hearts and our own fitrah, and that would also be true. But I used to teach American history, and I'll remind you of an episode in American history called the Civil Rights Movement. In the Civil Rights Movement, at that time, in the 1960s, it wasn't popular. If you took a poll of people in the 1960s, African American Christians, the majority of them, they wouldn't have approved of Martin Luther King Jr., let alone Malcolm X. Nowadays, it's universally praised. I ask you, how did that start? How did the civil rights movement begin? You look in the history, it began in the basements of churches in this country. Handfuls of individuals got together and said, how can we change things? And they did it. You had a handful of students, college students, they said, we're gonna go sit at a lunch counter, an all-white lunch counter, and we're not gonna get up until we're served. That became a mass movement. But you don't need to crack open the history books to see these things. Just remember back a year and a half ago when you had Muslim youth from our community and other communities, they came together on their college campuses and they said, we're not gonna pack up our tents until you divest from the genocide. And that protest, it grew and it spread. It became international news. It sparked debates on free speech in this country that we haven't seen in recent times. It moved the conversation forward, and it brought hope and a little bit of succour to the victims of a genocide. What's stopping us from doing that again? What's preventing us from doing another kind of protest like that gets people awakened? You come from a tradition that began in the house of Arqam, in Darul Arqam. A handful of people got together to hear the revelation. And 20 to 30 years later, some of those same people in that small handful group of people, they were conquering the Romans and the Persians. No. We take a lesson from the example of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He spent time alone, but he was never lonely. He was isolated, but he never gave up. and He left behind all the tools that you and I need to change our condition and to bring good into this world. Take an example from the Mujahid, who faces the bombs, the planes, and the tanks of the wealthiest nations in the world, conspired to crush people who have no material means. But he knows the land is with me, the sea is with me, the mountains and the trees are all with me, praising Allah Ta'ala. The servants of Allah Ta'ala and His angels are praying for my victory. He knows that he's not alone. And you too are not alone. Because huwa ma'akum aynama kuntum. Allah Ta'ala is with you wherever you are. This is simply a reality that you have to wake up to. And if you already understand that, then it's time to wake up the others. May Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالحق بشيرا ونذيرا بين يدي الساعة من يطع الله ورسوله فقد رشد ومن يعصهما فإنه لا يضر إلا نفسه ولا يضر الله شيئا. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد عبدك ورسولك وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات وألف بين قلوبهم وأصلح ذات بينهم وانصرهم على عدوك وعلى عدوهم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا وأزواجه وذريته. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أرحم أمتي بأمتي أبو بكر وأشدهم في أمر الله عمر وأصدقهم حياء عثمان وأقضاهم علي وفاطمة سيدة نساء أهل الجنة والحسن والحسين سيدا شباب أهل الجنة وحمزة أسد الله وأسد رسولي. اللهم اغفر للعباس وولدي مغفرة ظاهرة باطنة لا تغادر ذنبا. الله في أصحابي لا تتخذوهم غرضا من بعدي فمن أحبهم فبحبي أحبهم ومن أبغضهم فببغضي أبغضهم وخير أمتي قرني ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم. عباد الله رحمكم الله. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون. وأقم الصلاة إن الصلاة كانت على المؤمنين كتابا موقوتا.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله.